The silence in my working-class San Antonio neighborhood was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, a blanket of dust and loneliness that suffocated the sound of the birds. My small house, a wooden bungalow my late husband and I had built with our own hands, seemed like a ghost from a forgotten era, shrinking before the new, imposing condominiums that sprouted around it like weeds of concrete and glass. They represented a future in which I did not fit, a world of haste and ambition that had swallowed the kindness and memories that once filled these streets. With each new building, I felt smaller, more invisible, a relic waiting to be swept away. Sitting on my old rocking chair on the porch, I felt the rough, peeling wood beneath my fingers. The chair, like me, creaked with every movement, a tired protest against the weight of years and disappointments. The afternoon air was still and hot, heavy with the sweet, sad scent of my dying roses, a fragrance that once brought me joy and now only reinforced my own decay. I looked at my hands in my lap, the veins bulging like dry rivers on a map of wrinkled skin. Hands that had once sewn wedding dresses, mended the knees of my son's overalls, and caressed my husband's face, now lay still, useless. My reflection in the window pane showed the exact image of what I felt inside. A 78-year-old woman, shrunken, with shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. My white hair, once my pride, was carelessly tied up, and my eyes, a blue that had once been as vibrant as the Texas sky, were faded, clouded by tears that refused to fall. I wore one of my old floral dresses, stained and worn, covered by an apron that hadn't seen a bustling kitchen in years. I was a living portrait of abandonment, a museum piece in my own home. His words still echoed in my head, sharp and cold. "You're useless, Mom. This house is the only valuable thing you have left, and you're just taking up space. Daniel." My son, the cruelty in his voice, was more painful than the push that made me hit my head against the wall. With every creak of the chair, the words returned, and I shrank a little more, feeling the emptiness in my chest widen into an abyss. Loneliness was a constant companion, but humiliation was a new and terribly cruel visitor that had settled in every corner of my soul. My gaze drifted to the garden, which had once been my sanctuary. The roses, which my husband and I planted in our first year of marriage, struggled to breathe amidst a tangle of tall, aggressive weeds. Each yellowed leaf, each bud that failed to bloom, was a mirror of my own life, a visual representation of the neglect and sadness that had taken over everything. The garden was dying, and I felt I was dying with it, suffocated by the bitterness and despair that grew uncontrollably within me, tearing away beauty and hope. Unconsciously, my hand rose to my hairline, touching the yellowish-purple bruise that throbbed gently under the skin. I hid. With a lock of hair, as if not seeing it in the mirror could erase the memory. It was a shameful mark, an ugly secret that proved how low my own son had fallen. He hadn't called in days since the incident. His silence was almost as violent as his actions, a final confirmation that to him, I was nothing more than an obstacle, a problem to be removed so he could get his hands on the money from the sale of the house. It was then that a movement on the sidewalk caught my attention. A thin figure, a young teenage girl, stopped in front of my rusted gate. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her hair fell in a tangled mess over her face, but there was something in her posture, a straightness in her shoulders that held my gaze. She didn't look like the beggars who sometimes passed by. She just stood there, observing my dying garden with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of curiosity and perhaps compassion. Her face was young, but her eyes seemed to carry a long and difficult story. There were dark circles under them, but not the emptiness I expected. There was a flame there, small and flickering, but present. She didn't look at me with pity, as the neighbors sometimes did, with their quick glances and disguised whispers. She looked at the flowers, at the weeds, as if she understood the battle being fought on that small patch of land. For an instant, the outside world with its buildings and noises disappeared, and there was only me, on my porch, and that girl on my sidewalk. My first instinct was fear. The world had taught me to be suspicious, and Daniel's cruelty had turned that suspicion into a paralyzing dread of being hurt again. My body tensed in the chair, waiting for the request, the demand, the lie. My heart began to beat faster, a drum of anxiety in my chest. I braced myself for whatever was coming, for another disappointment, for another person wanting to take something from me. I waited for her to hold out her hand and ask for money, which would make it easier to ignore her and retreat back into my shell of apathy. But she asked for nothing. Instead, she raised a thin arm and pointed to the rosebed. Her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly soft, almost a whisper that the afternoon wind barely carried to me. "Ma'am," she said, with a clarity that contrasted with her disheveled appearance, "if you let me use your hose to drink some water, I can pull these weeds for you. They're suffocating the roses." The sentence hung in the air, simple, direct, and completely unexpected, disarming all my defenses. The impact of those words was physical. I felt as if a small window had been opened in a stuffy room, letting in a breath of fresh air. She didn't want charity. She wanted to make an exchange. She offered her work, her strength, in return for something as basic as a drink of water. The dignity in her request was such a brutal contrast to the greed and demands of my own son that for a moment I was breathless. He, who had everything, only wanted to take more from me. She, who had nothing, was offering me a gift. The phrase, "they're suffocating the roses," echoed in my mind, but with a much deeper meaning. I was being suffocated. My spirit, my joy, my will to live. Everything was being crushed by the weeds of cruelty, loneliness, and despair. That young stranger, without knowing it, had given voice to my most secret pain. She wasn't just talking about flowers, she was talking about me, and by offering to help. My garden, she was, in some way, offering help to my soul. It was the first time in years that I truly saw another person, my eyes fixed on hers, and the vulnerability I saw there mirrored my own. But there was also a resilience that I had lost long ago. She was a survivor. I could see that. In that moment, an invisible connection formed between us, a bridge over the abyss of our individual pains. A spark of an old, almost forgotten feeling ignited within me, the will to protect, to care. It was a maternal instinct I thought had been destroyed by Daniel. With an effort that felt monumental, I stood up from the rocking chair. My knees popped in protest, but I held steady. I took a step toward the porch stairs, my hand trembling slightly as it rested on the railing. I looked at the girl, who waited patiently, without any sign of impatience. I opened my mouth, and the word came out hoarse from disuse, but clear. "Come in." It was more than an invitation to enter my yard. It was an invitation to enter my life, a small act of rebellion against the darkness that threatened to consume me completely. Enjoying this story? Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from so I can send you a hug in the next video. I watched from the doorway as Luna, the young woman who had appeared like a ghost from my past, turned on the hose spigot with a gentleness that surprised me. The water gushed out, sparkling in the afternoon sun, and she drank with a thirst that seemed to come from her soul, not just her body. Each gulp was long and deep. There was no rush, only the pure, simple satisfaction of a basic need being met. I remained silent, my heart a knot of confused emotions. A part of me, the hurt and frightened part, screamed for me to lock the door and hide. But another part, one I hadn't heard in years, told me to stay and watch. Finished with her water, she wasted no time. With a quiet determination, Luna walked to the most infested rosebed and knelt on the dry earth. Her hands, though young, moved with a skill that suggested practice. She didn't just pull the weeds from the surface. She dug her fingers into the soil, seeking the root, ensuring the blight was completely removed. Each invasive plant she tossed aside was like a small victory, a small portion of beauty being rescued from neglect. I watched her, fascinated, seeing more than just gardening. I saw an act of restoration, a silent battle fought on my behalf. The sun was strong, and soon sweat began to glisten on her forehead. Moved by an impulse I didn't fully understand, I went inside and poured a tall glass of lemonade, the ice clinking against the glass. Taking that glass to her was one of the hardest things I had done in a long time. It was a gesture of trust, a bridge I was building over the chasm of my mistrust. When I offered her the drink, her eyes widened for a second in surprise before a small, genuine smile appeared on her lips. She accepted with a whispered thank you, and that simple moment of connection felt more real than any conversation I'd had with my son in years. While she drank the lemonade, I worked up the courage to ask her name. "Luna," she replied, her voice still soft. The name seemed to suit her, a soft light in the midst of darkness. I saw how thin her arms were and the weariness in her face, and the words came out before I could stop them. "You must be hungry. Come in. I can make some soup." The kitchen, which for so long had been a space of painful memories and silence, suddenly felt like the right place to be. The smell of onion and garlic sautéing in olive oil began to fill the air, and with it, a sense of purpose. Sitting at my small kitchen table, with bowls of steaming vegetable soup between us, the initial silence was broken by her story. Luna didn't cry or complain. With a desolate calm, she told me she had run away from a foster home. She described in short, direct sentences, an environment of emotional abuse, where she was treated more like a servant than a daughter. She spoke of the constant feeling of being a burden, of not belonging anywhere. Every word she spoke was a mirror of my own pain, my own feeling of being disposable in the hands of someone who should love and protect me. In that moment, looking at this girl who ate my soup as if it were the finest of banquets, I no longer saw a stranger. I saw myself. I saw the same vulnerability, the same longing for a safe place, the same wound caused by the betrayal of those who should have cared for us. The abandonment we both felt, though in different ways, connected us in a deep and instantaneous way. The compassion I felt for her was fierce, almost primal. It was the compassion I wished someone had felt for me. The decision formed in my heart, with absolute clarity. "You can stay the night," I said, and the sentence seemed to fill the kitchen with a new possibility. "The guest room is ready." Luna looked at me, her eyes, searching for any sign that it was an empty offer, but she found only sincerity. A visible relief relaxed her shoulders. Later, as I changed the sheets on the bed in Daniel's old room, I felt as if I were performing a ritual of purification. I was removing the memories of his demands and his anger, and preparing the space for someone who, in a few short hours, had already given me more than he had in years. A glimpse of hope. That night, for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel so empty. The soft sound of Luna's breathing coming from down the hall was a comfort, a reminder that I was not completely alone in this cocoon of sadness. I knew I was taking a risk. My mind, trained by trauma, bombarded me with doubts and fears. What if Daniel was right? What if I was being deceived? But then I remembered the care with which she pulled the weeds, the genuine smile when she received the lemonade, the painful honesty in her eyes, and my heart, for the first time, told me to ignore the fear. I woke up the next morning with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity. What would the day bring? From my bedroom window, I saw that Luna was already in the garden, not working frantically, but tending to the roses with a monk's patience, pruning the dry branches and loosening the soil. The morning sun enveloped her in a golden light, and the scene was so peaceful it brought tears to my eyes. Her presence had changed the atmosphere of the house. It was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It was beginning to breathe again, to have life. The following days turned into a quiet, healing routine. One night became 2, then a week. We talked little, but our communication was constant. We worked side by side in the garden, and under her guidance, I began to feel the earth under my fingernails again. She taught me to identify new shoots and to protect the most fragile plants. Together, we planted new seeds. The garden began to flourish, and I felt that something inside me was flourishing too. I started cooking again, dishes I hadn't made since my husband was alive. The The smell of baking bread filled the house. It was in the midst of this newfound peace that the sound I dreaded most tore through the afternoon quiet. The aggressive roar of an expensive engine, followed by tires screeching on the asphalt. I looked out the window and my stomach turned to ice. Daniel's shiny black sedan was parked in front of my house, a dark, oily stain on the serene landscape of our neighborhood. He hadn't called to say he was coming. He never did. Every muscle in my body tensed in anticipation of the storm that was about to break over us. The peace was fragile, and I knew it was about to be shattered. He didn't knock. He used the key I had begged him to return and walked in as if he owned the place, which, in his mind, he probably did. His eyes swept across the living room, noticing the small changes: a vase with a freshly cut rose, the absence of dust on the furniture, with a look of disdain. Then, through the open back door, he saw Luna in the garden, her back to us, watering the new seeds. His face hardened into a mask of fury and suspicion. The air in the room grew heavy, electric, difficult to breathe. "Who the hell is that in my garden?" His voice was low and threatening, each word dripping with contempt. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on Luna, like a predator sizing up prey. Before I could answer, he continued, his volume rising. "I don't believe this. Have you gone completely insane? You let some tramp, some beggar into your house? Into our house?" He turned to me, his face red with anger, and I instinctively recoiled, fear a bitter taste in my mouth. The old power dynamic reasserted itself in an instant. I tried to explain, to say that Luna was a good girl, that she was helping me, but my voice was a trembling thread that could barely get out. Her name is Luna. She's a friend." The word friend seemed to infuriate him even more. He let out a short, cruel laugh. "Friend? Mom, you're senile. She's a con artist. She's using you. She's just waiting for you to turn your back to rob you of every last cent. How old are you, 12? How can you be so naive, so stupid?" Each insult was a stone thrown against the fragile structure of trust I had begun to build. Then he pulled out his final weapon, the threat he knew terrified me more than anything else. "That's it. I've had enough. You've proven you're not fit to take care of yourself. I'm going to call social services right now. I'm going to have them get this delinquent out of here. And I'm going to start the paperwork to have you committed to a nursing home. It's for your own good. You need people who know what's best for you, since you obviously don't." He took out his phone, the gesture theatrical and cruel, designed to break me completely. Hearing the shouting, Luna came in from the garden, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her old jeans. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She looked at Daniel and then at me, huddled near the wall. There was fear in her eyes, yes, the fear of someone who knew this kind of rage, but there was also a quiet strength. "Mrs. Alara," she said softly, her voice a counterpoint to Daniel's brutality. "It's okay. I can leave. I don't want to cause trouble." The nobility in her words, her willingness to sacrifice herself to protect me, was like an electric shock to my paralyzed heart. Seeing the fear in Luna's eyes, the same fear I felt, ignited something within me. It was the instinct to protect a child, an instinct Daniel had tried to erase, but which was there, dormant. Caring for Luna had become my purpose, my silent act of rebellion against my own victimization. And I was not going to let him hurt her. I raised my head, and although my whole body trembled, I looked at my son. "She's not going anywhere," I said. The voice was still weak, but the sentence was a declaration of war. The silence that followed was heavy. The battle was just beginning. The contrast between Luna's generosity and Daniel's greed was the proof I needed. For years, he had financially exploited me, using my love and my sense of duty as a tool to get what he wanted. He made me feel small, incompetent, a burden. He would take my pension money for his emergencies, which I would later discover were gambling debts or bad investments, always with the promise that he would pay me back, a hollow promise. That was never fulfilled. He emptied my bank account, and worse, he emptied my self-esteem. The value he placed on me was directly linked to the monetary value of the house. In our last conversations before the assault, he no longer spoke of my health or my well-being. He spoke of the real estate market, of a $300,000 offer from a construction company that wanted to demolish my bungalow to erect another one of those concrete monsters. To him, I was not his mother. I was the guardian of a financial asset he desperately wanted to liquidate. The house was the solution to all his problems, and I was the only obstacle in his path. Luna's presence in my house was the last straw for him, not because he cared about me, but because she represented a complication, a witness, a possible influence that could strengthen me against him. His anger was not concern, it was panic. He accused me of being deceived by a con artist, but the truth is that the only con artist there was him, who for years had deceived me with false displays of affection, always with a financial interest behind them. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. As the tension in the room grew, the neighbors, drawn by the shouting, began to peek through their curtains. Their curious gazes were like little pins on my skin. I had always cared about what others thought, always tried to maintain the appearance of a functional family, even when everything was falling apart. Daniel knew this and used public shame as another weapon against me. He wanted me to feel exposed, judged, and isolated, so that I would become easier to manipulate. He wanted everyone to see the crazy old woman who needed to be controlled by her concerned son. The fear of being seen as incapable as a senile old woman was one of my greatest terrors. Daniel had planted this seed of doubt in my mind for years, watering it with derogatory comments and false concerns. "Mom, you're getting forgetful. Mom, you can't live alone anymore. Mom, you're going to end up starting a fire." Each sentence was a small blow to my confidence, making me doubt my own judgment, making me believe that I really needed him, that without him I would be lost. It was a psychological prison built with care and cruelty. But looking at Luna, who stood quiet and dignified in the midst of the storm, gave me a new perspective. She, who had been through things I could barely imagine, was not broken. She was hurt, yes, but her essence was intact. Her presence reminded me that strength did not come from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it. By deciding to protect her, I was, in fact, deciding to protect myself, the woman I was before being reduced to a shadow by my son's greed and contempt. The battle was no longer just for Luna or the house, it was for my soul. The week that followed Daniel's furious departure was a strange limbo, a calm before the storm we both knew was coming. The air in my house was thick with anticipation. Every car that slowed down on the street made my heart race. Every ring of the phone left me with sweaty palms. The fear was still there, a familiar ghost on my shoulder, but something had changed. It no longer paralyzed me. Instead of hiding in my room, I spent hours in the garden with Luna, sinking my hands into the earth as if I could draw strength from it. Every new flower we tended was a small act of defiance, a silent declaration that life would go on, with or without his approval. Luna sensed my anxiety, though we never spoke of it directly. She found quiet ways to soothe me. She would bring me a cup of chamomile tea in the late afternoon, put on soft music on the old kitchen radio, or simply sit beside me on the porch, her tranquil presence a balm to my frayed nerves. In those moments, I realized the depth of our connection. We were not grandmother and granddaughter by blood, but we had become a family in the truest sense of the word, two souls who found each other amidst the wreckage of their lives and decided to support one another, building a safe harbor against the world. The storm arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was gray and heavy, a premonition of what was to come. Daniel's car pulled up in front of my house again, but this time, he was not alone. A man in a cheap suit and a fake smile got out of the passenger seat. He carried a synthetic leather briefcase and looked at my house not as a home, but as a product, his eyes calculating square footage and profit potential. He was a real estate agent. Daniel's strategy had shifted from emotional intimidation to official bureaucratic pressure. He came prepared for the final battle. They didn't wait for an invitation. Daniel used his key again and opened the door. holding it for the agent with a forced hospitality. "This is the property," he said to the man, completely ignoring my presence in the living room. The agent walked in, his gaze sweeping over everything with a cold appraisal. He jotted something down on a notepad, commenting on the good structure and valuable lot. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a piece of antique furniture to be included in the inventory and then discarded. Luna appeared silently in the kitchen doorway, her eyes dark and watchful, a silent sentinel. Daniel walked to the coffee table and tossed the briefcase onto it. The sound of the object hitting the wood was like a gunshot in the tense silence. He opened the briefcase and took out a stack of papers, aligning them with a frightening precision. They were contracts, legal documents full of clauses and fine print that I didn't understand. On top, a pen. "Sit down, Mother," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "Let's get this over with. Mr. Henderson here just needs your signature to finalize the sale." I sat on the sofa, my legs suddenly weak. The agent, Mr. Henderson, smiled at me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He began to talk about the benefits of the sale, about how it would be a relief for me not to have to worry about the house's upkeep, about the financial security the money would bring. His words were a meaningless buzz in my ears. All I could see was the pen, lying on the signature line, waiting for me to sign away my past, my present, and my future. It was the final surrender. Daniel, sensing my hesitation, leaned over the table, his voice lowering to a falsely confidential tone, but laden with threat. "Mother, I need this. My life is a mess. I'm in debt you can't even imagine. I made bad deals. This will fix everything. It's the least you can do for me after all the sacrifices I've made." Sacrifices? The audacity of his words left me breathless. He painted himself as the victim, the suffering son, and me, the selfish mother clinging to a pile of old bricks. He pushed the papers and the pen closer, until they were inches from my trembling hand. "You owe me this," he hissed, his face close to mine. "You owe me for raising me, for giving me life. It's your obligation to help me. Sign." His large body cornered me on the sofa, his physical presence suffocating, an intimidation tactic he had used countless times. I felt panic rise in my throat, the same panic that always made me give in. My arm began to move, almost of its own accord, my hand reaching for the pen. In that instant of near defeat, as my will was about to crumble, a calm shadow moved. Luna stepped forward, out of the kitchen doorway. She didn't run or shout. With a silent, powerful grace, she positioned herself between me and Daniel. She didn't touch him, didn't confront him physically, but her presence was an unshakable barrier. The agent took a step back, surprised by the interruption. Daniel turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Get out of here, you little brat! This is none of your business!" Luna didn't back down. She lifted her chin and looked directly into Daniel's eyes, not with anger, but with a clarity that disarmed him. Her voice, when she spoke, was as clear and steady as a church bell. "This house isn't made of wood and bricks," she said, each word carefully chosen. "It's made of her memories, of laughter and tears, of the smell of Sunday breakfast and the warmth of the fireplace in winter." She paused, letting the images hang in the air, filling the space with a truth that no contract could capture. She continued, her gaze never wavering from his. "You look at these walls and see a price, a number on a check. But she looks at them and sees her husband's face, hears her son's voice when he was little, and still knew how to love. Every plank of this floor holds the story of a lifetime." Her voice grew even stronger, resonating with a wisdom far beyond her years. "You're not selling a house, Daniel. You're trying to sell your mother's soul, and that is something that is priceless." Luna's words fell on me like a healing rain. She had verbalized the sacred truth I carried in my heart but never had the courage to say aloud. In that moment, the spell Daniel held over me was broken. The fear, which had been my constant companion, evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked at my son and no longer saw the man who could destroy me. I saw a scared boy, a weak and hollow man, consumed by a greed that had left him starved inside. And for the first time, I felt pity for him. Gathering a strength I didn't know I possessed, I rose from the sofa. I stood tall, taller than I had felt in decades. I looked directly into Daniel's eyes, without blinking, without flinching. The trembling in my body had stopped. My voice, when it came out, was not that of a victim, but that of a matriarch defending her territory. "She's right," I said, and the sound of my own conviction surprised me. "You may have my blood, but you no longer have my heart. This house is not for sale." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "And you," I continued, my gaze steady as steel, "are no longer welcome here. Your key, your name in this house, all of it is over." The shock on Daniel's face was my confirmation. He was used to my tears, not my strength. He opened his mouth to protest, to shout, but no words came out. The power had shifted, decisively and irrevocably. With a slow, deliberate movement, I reached out and took the stack of contracts from the table. I held the papers, feeling their symbolic weight. They were my chains, my sentences, the proof of my submission. I looked at Daniel one last time, and then, with a strength that came from the depths of my newly freed soul, I tore the documents in half. The sound of the paper ripping was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I tore them again and again, until they were nothing but useless scraps. I let them fall to the floor, a snow of paper at my son's feet, the final confession of my independence. The silence that settled after the humiliated departure of Daniel and the real estate. Agent was different from all the others. It wasn't heavy or empty. It was vast and full of possibilities. I looked at the scraps of paper on the floor, the remnants of my old life of fear, and then I looked at Luna. Her eyes shone, not with triumph, but with deep relief. In that moment, without a word needing to be spoken, we knew we had won. Not just a battle against a greedy man, but the battle for our own lives. Together we swept up the torn papers and, with them, the last shadow of the past. The following week, I took the most frightening and courageous step of my life. With the help of a legal aid lawyer, a kind man with tired eyes, I began the legal process to become Luna's guardian. There were piles of bureaucracy, interviews with social workers, and court hearings. It was a draining process that exposed our wounds to the scrutiny of strangers. But with every form I filled out and every question I answered, I felt my determination grow stronger. I wasn't just fighting for her. I was affirming to the world and to myself that I was capable, strong, and worthy of building a family. While the legal battle unfolded, our true healing took place in the garden. We plunged our hands into the earth, pulling out the last of the weeds and planting new rows of flowers and vegetables. The garden transformed under our care, becoming a vibrant oasis of colors and scents. Every new sprout that emerged was proof of our resilience. The garden was the perfect metaphor for our lives, a place that had been abandoned and suffocated, but that, with love and care, could flourish again, more beautiful and stronger than before. The house, once a sanctuary of silence and sadness, now echoed with life. Luna's laughter, a clear and melodious sound, became the soundtrack to my days. The kitchen was always warmed by the oven, smelling of cornbread, apple pie, and stews. We started using the porch again, not to mourn the past, but to celebrate the present, drinking iced lemonade. On hot afternoons and watching the neighbors, who now greeted us with genuine smiles and waves of respect. The house had become a home again, a place filled not by blood ties, but by ties of choice. I rediscovered my passion for sewing. I dusted off my old Singer machine and, with colorful fabrics bought with the little money from my pension, I started making dresses for Luna. Seeing her twirl in a floral dress I had made, her face lit up with joy, was a greater payment than any money could buy. Soon, we were sewing together, making clothes and blankets that we donated to a local youth shelter. My old craft, which I associated with loneliness, became a tool for connection and generosity, stitching our hearts to the community. We became an unusual, but unbreakable family. A woman in her late 70s and a teenager of 16, united not by genetics, but by a mutual understanding of pain and a shared need for healing. We learned that love doesn't ask for permission, and that true family is a refuge we build with respect, care, and unconditional acceptance. Luna taught me courage, and I hope, taught her that she was worthy of being loved. Together, we were proof that second chances are not only possible, but can be sweeter than the first. My new philosophy of life, forged in the fire of pain and overcoming, was simple. True home is not the roof you are born under, but the place where your heart is valued. It is not the walls that make a house, but the people who fill it with love. Daniel, in his blind pursuit of material wealth, had lost the only wealth that truly mattered. He left me with an empty house, but Luna transformed it into an overflowing home. And that was an inheritance that no amount of money in the world could buy. Have you ever done a gesture of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment: love is priceless if you also believe in human kindness.